The bustling streets of Tokyo hummed with life, but Yuji Itadori paid little attention to the crowds as he jogged through the evening shadows. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, the city's pulse thrumming in time with his own restless energy. He was just a high school student with an unusual hobby, training in martial arts at a local dojo, but lately, his life had taken a turn toward the surreal. His grandfather's final words still echoed in his mind: help others. Die surrounded by people. It was a simple request, but fulfilling it had led him down a path he never expected. That path had brought him to Jujutsu High, a hidden school for sorcerers who battled cursed spirits, malignant entities born from human negativity. Here, Yuji had learned that his superhuman strength wasn't just a quirk of genetics, it was a gift, one that made him a prime candidate to contain the king of curses, Ryomen Sukuna. The moment he swallowed Sukuna's withered finger to save his friends, his fate had been sealed. Now, he walked a razor's edge, balancing between his own humanity and the monstrous power lurking inside him. Beside him, Megumi Fushiguro moved with quiet precision, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. A prodigy of the Zenin clan, Megumi wielded the Ten Shadows technique, summoning Shikigami, mystical beasts, to fight by his side. His demeanor was serious, almost cold, but Yuji had come to recognize the fierce loyalty beneath. Megumi had been the one to drag him into this world, and though their first meeting had been hostile, they'd since forged an unspoken bond. Their mission tonight was straightforward: exorcise a cursed spirit lurking in an abandoned subway tunnel. But something felt off. The reports had mentioned only a grade 2 curse, yet the oppressive weight in the air suggested something far worse. As they descended into the tunnel's gloom, the flickering lights cast long, jagged shadows. The stench of rot and damp concrete clung to the air. Yuji cracked his knuckles, his muscles coiled tight. "You feel that?" he muttered. Megumi didn't answer, but his hands were already forming the shadow puppet of a dog. "Divine dog," he whispered, and from the darkness, two massive canine Shikigami materialized, their fur gleaming like ink under moonlight. They snarled, sensing what their masters couldn't yet see. Then, the walls moved. A grotesque figure peeled itself from the concrete, its elongated limbs twitching as it unfolded like a nightmare-given form. Its face was a mass of writhing tendrils, its mouth splitting open in a grin too wide for any human skull. The curse lunged, faster than expected, its clawed fingers raking toward Yuji's throat. Yuji reacted on instinct, his body twisting midair as he dodged and countered with a devastating punch. His fist connected with the curse's ribs, the impact sending cracked spider webbing through its twisted flesh. But the creature barely flinched. It lashed out again, its arm elongating like rubber, wrapping around Yuji's waist and slamming him into the opposite wall. Before the curse could press its advantage, Megumi's divine dog struck, their jaws clamping onto its limbs. The curse shrieked, thrashing violently, but the Shikigami held firm. Megumi's hands moved again, forming another sign. "Nu," he commanded, and from the shadows, a winged beast with glowing eyes swooped down, talons raking deep gouges into the curse's back. Yuji pushed himself up, spitting out blood. "Tough bastard," he growled. Then, with a burst of speed, he closed the distance, his fists a blur as he unleashed a flurry of strikes, each one carrying enough force to shatter bone. The curse staggered, its body pulsing unnaturally before it suddenly split into two identical horrors. Megumi cursed under his breath. "It's adapting." The curses attacked in unison, their movements synchronized. One went for Yuji, the other for Megumi. Yuji blocked a swipe with his forearm, the impact sending shockwaves up his muscles, but he grinned. "All right, let's get serious." He exhaled sharply, focusing his cursed energy into his fists. The air around his hands shimmered faintly as he channeled his innate technique, Divergent Fist, a delayed impact that struck twice. His next punch landed, and a second later, the curse's torso exploded from the inside out. Across the tunnel, Megumi was locked in a deadly dance with the other curse. It dodged his Shikigami with eerie precision, its limbs twisting in impossible angles. Then, without warning, its body bulged, its flesh bubbling before it vomited a torrent of black sludge. Megumi barely rolled aside in time, but the acid-like substance sizzled where it landed, eating through concrete. "Megumi," Yuji shouted, already moving. "I'm fine," Megumi snapped, but his breathing was uneven. He wiped sweat from his brow, reassessing. This wasn't a grade 2. Maybe not even a grade 1. Something was amplifying its power. Yuji didn't give it time to recover. He dashed forward, feinting left before pivoting into a spinning kick that sent the curse crashing into the wall. Before it could rise, he drove his fist into its face, the delayed force of Divergent Fist pulverizing its skull. The curse convulsed once before dissolving into foul-smelling smoke. Silence settled over the tunnel, broken only by their ragged breaths. That wasn't normal, Yuji said, flexing his sore hand. Megumi nodded grimly. Curses don't evolve mid-fight unless something's influencing them. He glanced at the fading remnants of the curse, his frown deepening. Someone's playing games. Yuji's stomach twisted. If this was just the beginning, what else was coming? Above them, unnoticed, a single crow watched from the rafters before melting into the darkness. Word count, 1,250. The air in the dimly lit alley was thick with tension as Yuji clutched the cursed lottery ticket in his fist, its edges glowing ominously with residual cursed energy. The weight of what he'd just drawn settled over him like a suffocating fog. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a death sentence disguised as chance. Megumi's sharp inhale beside him confirmed it. That's a binding vow, he muttered, his voice low and urgent. Whoever holds it is marked for a cursed spirit's hunt until the timer runs out, or until they're dead. Yuji's stomach twisted. The ticket pulsed in his grip, its countdown already ticking away, 3 hours. 3 hours before something far worse than a low-grade curse came for him. Before he could respond, a guttural growl echoed from the shadows. A hulking figure emerged, its body a grotesque patchwork of rotting flesh and jagged bone, its single milky eye fixed on Yuji with ravenous hunger. Ah, Nobara said dryly, twirling her hammer. Right on schedule. The curse lunged, its elongated limbs scraping against the brick walls as it barreled toward them. Yuji barely had time to react before Megumi's hands flashed through signs. Divine dogs. Twin shadows erupted from the ground, snarling as they intercepted the curse mid-leap. The beasts tore into its flesh, but the creature barely flinched. Instead, its body split open, revealing a second mouth that spewed acidic bile. The divine dogs yelped as the corrosive spray melted through their forms, forcing Megumi to dismiss them before they were fully destroyed. Nobara didn't wait. She hurled a nail, embedding it into the curse's shoulder before slamming her hammer down. Resonance. The curse shuddered as the vibrations rippled through its body, but instead of collapsing, it laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Its flesh bubbled, then split apart, revealing a smaller, faster curse that darted toward Yuji like a striking viper. Yuji's instincts kicked in. He sidestepped, driving his fist into the creature's skull with a crack. It crumpled, but the victory was short-lived. The alley walls trembled as more figures emerged, curses, drawn by the lottery's signal. This isn't just one curse, Megumi realized, his voice tight. It's a beacon. They'll keep coming. Nobara cursed under her breath. So we're playing bodyguard for the next 3 hours? Fantastic. She drove another nail into a creeping curse, but her usual confidence wavered as she glanced at Yuji. You better not die on us, idiot. Yuji grinned, though his chest tightened. Wouldn't dream of it. But the fear gnawed at him. This wasn't like fighting Sukuna's fingers, this was deliberate, targeted. Someone had rigged this. The curses attacked in waves, their forms twisting unnaturally. One lashed out with whip-like tendrils, forcing Megumi to summon new. The massive Shikigami's talons raked through the curses, but even as they fell, more took their place. Yuji fought like a whirlwind, his fists a blur, but exhaustion crept in. A curse slipped past his guard, its claws slashing his arm. He hissed but didn't slow, until a voice cut through the chaos. Having trouble? Gojo stood atop a nearby fire escape, his blindfold tilted just enough to reveal a glint of amusement. Relief flooded Yuji, until he noticed the cold edge in Gojo's smile. Sensei. Megumi called. We need. I know, Gojo interrupted. But this isn't just about the lottery. He dropped down, landing effortlessly between them. Someone's playing a game. And they're not alone. Before anyone could respond, a figure materialized from the darkness, a man in a tattered cloak, his face obscured by a mask of stitched flesh. The curses stilled, as if awaiting orders. Ah, Satoru Gojo, the man mused. I was hoping you'd show up. Gojo's playful demeanor vanished. Who are you? The man chuckled. Just a messenger. But my master is very interested in your student. His gaze locked onto Yuji. The one who carries Sukuna's power. And now, a death sentence. Yuji's blood ran cold. This wasn't random. They'd been waiting for him. The masked man raised a hand, and the curses surged forward, but these were different. Stronger. Faster. One slammed into Megumi before he could react, sending him crashing into a dumpster. Nobara barely dodged a swipe from another, her nails scattering as she rolled aside. Gojo moved, his infinity flaring as he obliterated curses with casual flicks of his wrist. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once. A curse slipped past him, its jaws gaping as it lunged for Yuji. Time seemed to slow. Yuji braced himself, but then, a flash of pink hair blurred past him. A fist collided with the curse's face, sending it flying. "Took you long enough," Toto announced, cracking his knuckles. His grin was wild, but his eyes were deadly serious. "You didn't think I'd let my brother die, did you?" Yuji's relief was palpable. "Toto. No time for thanks." Toto grabbed Yuji's shoulder, spinning him around just as another curse attacked. "We fight together. Or we die alone." The battle raged on, but now, with Toto at his side and Gojo holding the line, Yuji felt a spark of hope. Still, the masked man's words haunted him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was a trap. And they were already in it. The air in the dimly lit alley was thick with the scent of damp concrete and the metallic tang of cursed energy. Yuji's knuckles were still raw from the last fight, his breath steady but heavy as he adjusted his stance. Megumi's shadows coiled at his feet, ready to strike, while Nobara twirled her hammer, her eyes sharp with anticipation. They had expected another wave of curses, but what emerged from the gloom was something entirely unexpected, a figure draped in a tattered black coat, his grin sharp enough to cut glass. "Looks like I've hit the jackpot," the stranger drawled, rolling his shoulders as if loosening up for a brawl. His cursed energy pulsed erratically, wild and untamed, like a storm barely contained. Megumi's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" The man chuckled, flipping a rusted coin between his fingers. "Name's Ryo. And you're the poor bastards who've been stirring up trouble in my territory." Yuji frowned. "Your territory? Since when does a curse user call dibs on a city?" Ryo's grin widened. "Since I made it mine." Without warning, he flicked the coin into the air, and the world seemed to slow. The moment it reached its apex, he vanished, reappearing behind Nobara with a blade of condensed cursed energy aimed at her spine. She barely twisted in time, the edge grazing her side as she countered with a swing of her hammer. The impact sent a shockwave through the alley, but Ryo was already gone, his laughter echoing off the walls. Megumi's divine dogs lunged, but Ryo danced between them, his movements fluid and unpredictable. He wasn't just fast, he was reading them, adapting. Yuji charged next, his fist crackling with cursed energy, but Ryo ducked low, sweeping Yuji's legs before driving an elbow toward his throat. Yuji blocked just in time, the force still sending him skidding back. "You're not bad," Ryo admitted, cracking his neck. "But you're predictable." Nobara spat blood from her split lip. "Yeah? Let's see how predictable this is." She slammed a nail into her palm, and Ryo's coat suddenly jerked as if yanked by an invisible force. He staggered, but instead of panicking, his grin turned feral. "Resonance, huh? Cute trick." With a flick of his wrist, a burst of cursed energy shattered the connection, sending Nobara stumbling. Megumi seized the opening, his noose screeching as it dove from above. Ryo barely raised a barrier in time, the impact cratering the ground beneath him. But as the dust cleared, he wasn't there, only a shimmer in the air where he'd been. A second later, he materialized behind Megumi, his blade aimed for the kill. Yuji barely intercepted, their forearms locking in a clash of raw strength. "You're wasting your time," Ryo hissed. "I'm not here to play hero or villain. I'm here to win." Yuji's muscles burned as he pushed back. "Win what?" Ryo's eyes gleamed. "The game." Then the world exploded in light. A shockwave of cursed energy erupted from Ryo, sending all three of them flying. Yuji hit the ground hard, his vision swimming as he forced himself up. Ryo stood at the center of the devastation, his coat flaring like the wings of a vulture. "You've got potential," he said, dusting off his sleeves. "But potential doesn't mean shit if you can't adapt." Nobara wiped her brow, her grip tightening on her hammer. "What's his deal? Some kind of rogue sorcerer with a god complex?" Megumi's shadows writhed in agitation. "Worse. He's playing his own game, and we're just pieces." Ryo chuckled. "Smart kid. But not smart enough." He raised a hand, and the air hummed as cursed energy coalesced into jagged shards. "Let's see how you handle this." The shards shot forward like bullets. Yuji barely dodged, one grazing his cheek as he lunged again. This time, he feinted left, then pivoted right, his fist connecting with Ryo's ribs. The impact sent Ryo skidding, but he recovered instantly, countering with a knee to Yuji's gut. The air left Yuji's lungs in a rush, but he gritted his teeth and grabbed Ryo's arm, flipping him over his shoulder. Ryo hit the ground, and laughed. "Now we're getting somewhere." Nobara and Megumi attacked in unison, her nails flying as his wolves flanked. Ryo twisted midair, deflecting the nails with a cursed barrier before kicking off one of the divine dogs to evade. But Megumi had anticipated it, his noose talons raked Ryo's back, drawing blood. For the first time, Ryo's smirk faltered. "All right," he spat, wiping his mouth. "You've got my attention." His cursed energy surged, darker now, more volatile. The ground trembled as shadows pooled at his feet, twisting into grotesque shapes. Yuji's instinct screamed danger. He's not just a curse user, Megumi realized. He's something else. Ryo's voice dropped to a whisper. "Let's see how you handle a real challenge." Then the world went black. When the light returned, Ryo was gone, but the alley was in ruins, and the trio stood battered but alive. Nobara exhaled sharply. What the hell was that? Yuji clenched his fists. A warning. Megumi's jaw tightened. And a threat. He's not done with us. The game had just gotten a lot more dangerous. The air in the Shibuya subway station was thick with the acrid stench of cursed energy, the flickering overhead lights casting jagged shadows across the cracked tile floor. Yuji Itadori's knuckles were raw, his breath ragged as he squared off against the cursed spirit before him, a grotesque, multi-limbed monstrosity that seemed to pulse with malice. Beside him, Nobara Kujisaki spun her hammer, her lips curled in defiance, while Megumi Fushiguro's shadows coiled like serpents at his feet. They had fought their way through hordes of curses to reach this point, but something was wrong. Too easy. Too convenient. Then the laughter started. It was a sound Yuji knew too well, smooth, mocking, laced with a cruelty that made his stomach twist. From the darkness, Mahito stepped forward, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. "Did you really think it would be this simple?" He crooned, tilting his head like a child inspecting an insect. "You've been playing right into my hands this whole time." Yuji's pulse spiked. "What the hell are you talking about?" Mahito's fingers twitched, and in an instant, the walls of the subway station shuddered. The ground beneath Nobara's feet split open, tendrils of cursed energy lashing out like whips. She barely dodged, but one grazed her arm, the flesh twisting grotesquely under Mahito's touch. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out, but the pain was written in the tightness of her jaw. Megumi lunged, his divine dog surging forward, but Mahito merely sighed, flicking his wrist. The shadows dissolved like smoke, and Megumi staggered, his technique unraveling mid-strike. "You still don't get it, do you?" Mahito chuckled. "This whole place, it's me." The realization hit Yuji like a punch to the gut. The subway wasn't just infested with curses, it had become one. Mahito had fused with the structure itself, his cursed energy woven into every brick, every rail. They weren't fighting in his territory, they were fighting inside him. Nobara spat blood onto the tiles. "So what? We'll just carve our way out." Mahito's grin widened. "Oh, I'm counting on it." The walls convulsed, the ceiling splitting apart as dozens of distorted faces emerged, their mouths gaping in silent screams. Yuji barely had time to react before the floor beneath him moved, tendrils of cursed energy snaking around his ankles. He twisted, slamming a fist into the ground, but the impact barely fazed it. Megumi's voice cut through the chaos. "Yuji, switch." Yuji didn't hesitate. He pivoted, slamming his palm against Megumi's outstretched hand just as Mahito's cursed energy surged toward them. The world lurched, and suddenly, they were outside the station, the cold night air biting at their skin. Nobara stumbled, clutching her injured arm, her face pale with exertion. Megumi's breathing was uneven. "I can't keep doing that. My cursed energy's almost gone." Yuji clenched his fists. They were outmatched. Every move they made played right into Mahito's game. But then, a voice crackled over their earpieces. Gojo's voice. "Change of plans. Fall back to the rendezvous point. Now." Yuji's blood ran cold. Gojo wasn't supposed to be here. He was sealed. Unless. Mahito's laughter echoed through the empty streets. "Oh, did you really think we'd leave your precious Gojo Satoru out of this?" The line went dead. Nobara's grip on her hammer tightened. "This is a trap." Megumi's jaw set. "And we walked right into it." Yuji felt the weight of it then, the crushing certainty that they'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. But beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, something else burned. A refusal to break. He met Mahito's gaze across the ruined street. "Then we'll tear the trap apart." The cursed spirit's smile faltered, just for a second. And then the real fight began. The air in Jujutsu High was thick with tension, the weight of recent events pressing down on every sorcerer's shoulders. Yuji's fingers clenched around the cursed object in his palm, the so-called lottery ticket that had sealed his fate. The markings on it pulsed faintly, a sinister reminder of the disaster looming just beyond their grasp. Across the room, Megumi's shadow stretched unnaturally long, his expression grim. "We don't have time to waste," he muttered, his voice low but urgent. "If we don't act now, that curse will spread faster than we can contain it." Nobra cracked her knuckles, her usual bravado tempered by exhaustion. "Then let's stop talking and start moving. I'm not letting some overgrown curse ruin my week." She glanced at Yuji, her gaze sharp. "You're the one who drew the short straw, so what's the plan?" Yuji exhaled sharply, his mind racing. The cursed spirit they'd encountered wasn't just powerful, it was evolving, adapting to their techniques faster than they could devise new ones. But there was a pattern to its movements, a split-second delay when it switched between offensive and defensive maneuvers. If they could exploit that. "We hit it where it's weakest," he said finally. "And we do it together." Training began in earnest, the group pushing themselves beyond their limits. Gojo observed from the sidelines, his blindfold obscuring his eyes but not his smirk. "Interesting strategy," he remarked as Yuji and Megumi practiced a synchronized assault, their cursed energy intertwining in a way that sent shockwaves through the training ground. "But if you're going to gamble with your lives, you'd better make sure the odds are in your favor." By nightfall, the trio had refined their approach. Nobra's nails were lined with cursed energy, each strike calibrated to disrupt the spirit's regeneration. Megumi's Shikigami moved in erratic patterns, forcing the enemy to divide its attention. And Yuji was the bait. He lunged first, his fist connecting with the curse's core, only for it to reform instantly, its laughter echoing like shattered glass. "Pathetic," it hissed, tendrils lashing out like whips. But Yuji grinned. Now. The environment became their weapon. Nobra's resonance technique sent shockwaves through the abandoned subway tunnels they'd lured the curse into, the walls trembling as cursed energy rebounded. Megumi's divine dogs harried it from the shadows, their teeth sinking deep before vanishing again. And then, the finishing blow, Yuji channeled every ounce of strength into a single strike, amplifying it with the kinetic energy of the collapsing ceiling above them. The curse screeched, its form flickering, but it wasn't enough. It retaliated with a wave of pure malice, sending them crashing into the rubble. Blood trickled from Yuji's lip as he forced himself up. "We're missing something," he panted. "There's got to be a weakness we haven't." Then he saw it. A fracture in the curse's aura, a fleeting moment when its energy stuttered. It was feeding off the residual fear in the tunnels, growing stronger with every second they hesitated. "We need to cut off its supply," Yuji realized. "Nobra, can you purify the area?" She wiped her brow, nodding. "Give me one clean shot." Megumi summoned his toads, their sticky tongues latching onto the curse, buying them precious seconds. Nobra's hammer came down, her technique severing the curse's connection to the environment. And Yuji, with a roar, delivered the final blow, his fist igniting with black and red energy as he shattered the curse's core for good. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. They'd won. For now. But as the dust settled, Yuji's grip tightened on the cursed lottery ticket still burning in his pocket. This wasn't over. And the next draw would be even deadlier. The air crackled with cursed energy as Yuji Itadori wiped blood from his split lip, his breath ragged but his stance unbroken. Across the ruined battlefield, his opponent, the monstrous cursed spirit, Dagon, loomed like a tidal wave of malice, its massive form wreathed in swirling water and jagged teeth. Every muscle in Yuji's body screamed in protest, but he clenched his fists tighter, the weight of his resolve outweighing the exhaustion. "No way I'm losing here," he growled, rolling his shoulders as cursed energy flared around him like a crimson storm. Dagon lunged, a geyser of pressurized water erupting beneath Yuji's feet, but the young sorcerer twisted midair, using the momentum to vault over the attack. He landed in a crouch, immediately springing forward, his fist already cocked back. "Divergent fist," he roared, his strike splitting into two trajectories, one real, one delayed. Dagon's massive arm swiped through the first, only for the second impact to slam into its jaw with a thunderous crack. The cursed spirit reeled, but before Yuji could press the advantage, a whip-like tendril of water lashed out, slicing across his chest. Blood sprayed, but Yuji barely flinched, pivoting on his heel and driving his knee upward into Dagon's ribs. Nearby, Megumi Fushiguro was locked in his own desperate struggle, his shadows writhing as he summoned new in a burst of lightning. The avian Shikigami screeched, diving toward Dagon, but the cursed spirit countered with a torrential surge that swallowed the attack whole. Megumi's breath hitched, his usual tactics weren't enough. He needed something bigger. Teeth gritted, he slammed his hands together, his cursed energy spiking as the ground beneath him darkened. Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. The world twisted as his domain unfolded, an endless expanse of shifting darkness. Dogon snarled, its own incomplete domain clashing against Megumi's, but the young sorcerer didn't falter. Shadows surged like living spears, piercing through the watery defenses. Yuji didn't waste the opening. He blurred forward, his fists a relentless storm, each punch carrying the weight of Sukuna's lingering power. Dogon staggered, its form flickering under the assault, but then, with a guttural roar, it retaliated. The battlefield erupted in a maelstrom of cursed water, the sheer force sending both Yuji and Megumi skidding back. Blood dripped from Megumi's nose, his domain flickering under the strain. "We need to end this fast," he panted. Yuji nodded, his body thrumming with adrenaline. Then, a voice cut through the chaos. "You two are making a mess." Gojo Satoru's casual tone was at odds with the devastation around them, but his presence alone sent a ripple through the air. Dogon froze, its instinct screaming danger. Without hesitation, Gojo raised a single finger. Hollow purple. The world seemed to fracture as reality itself bent, a swirling vortex of destruction obliterating everything in its path. Dogon had no time to react, its body disintegrated mid-scream, vaporized by the sheer, incomprehensible force. Silence fell, broken only by the distant crumbling of debris. Yuji exhaled sharply, his legs finally giving out as he collapsed to one knee. Megumi wasn't faring much better, his breathing ragged. Gojo tilted his head, surveying the damage. "You held your own," he remarked, though his usual smirk was absent. "But this isn't over yet." As if on cue, the ground trembled. A suffocating pressure descended, Mahito's twisted laughter echoed from the shadows. "Oh, this is getting fun." The patch-faced curse emerged, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. Yuji's blood ran cold. This was the one who had taken so much from him, Nanami, Junpei, countless others. Rage burned through his exhaustion, his fists trembling. Mahito didn't wait. His body warped, elongating as he lunged, his arm morphing into a grotesque blade. Yuji barely dodged, the edge grazing his cheek. He countered with a roundhouse kick, but Mahito's form liquefied, reforming behind him. "Too slow," the curse taunted. Megumi intercepted with a shadow tendril, but Mahito simply dissolved, reappearing inches from Yuji's face. "You still don't get it, do you? Souls are my playthings." His palm shot forward, idle transfiguration. Yuji's instinct screamed. He twisted, but not fast enough. Mahito's fingers brushed his arm. Agony lanced through him as his flesh writhed, threatening to distort, until a flash of blue light severed Mahito's wrist. Gojo stood between them, his infinity humming. "Nice try," he said lightly, though his eyes were glacial. Mahito staggered back, his grin never fading. "Ah, the strongest interferes again," he chuckled, his body already regenerating. "But you can't save them forever." Yuji forced himself upright, his vision sharpening. He wouldn't rely on Gojo. Not for this. "Megumi," he said lowly. "We're finishing this." His friend nodded, shadows coiling around him. Mahito's laughter turned manic. "Come on then. Show me your despair." The final clash erupted in a storm of cursed energy, fists, and shadows, each combatant pushing past their limits, adapting, surviving. Yuji's strikes grew faster, sharper, his soul burning with defiance. This wasn't just a battle. It was vengeance. And he wouldn't stop until Mahito was erased from existence. The air crackled with cursed energy as Yuji Itadori stood amidst the ruins of Shibuya, his breath ragged, his body pushed beyond its limits. Blood dripped from his split lip, his knuckles raw from relentless combat. Across the shattered battlefield, Sukuna's malevolent grin stretched wide, his four eyes gleaming with amusement. "You're still standing?" The king of curses taunted, flexing his clawed fingers. "How amusing." Yuji didn't answer. His mind raced, every failed attack, every near-fatal blow, every desperate gamble had led to this moment. His allies were scattered, some unconscious, others barely clinging to life. Megumi's shadow technique flickered weakly nearby, his stamina drained. Nobara was down, her breathing shallow. Gojo, still sealed. The weight of their losses pressed on him, but he refused to buckle. Sukuna lunged, his movements a blur of crimson and malice. Yuji barely dodged, the slash carving a trench into the earth behind him. He countered with a devastating punch, but Sukuna caught his fist effortlessly, crushing bone. Pain seared through him, but Yuji gritted his teeth and twisted free, landing a kick that sent Sukuna skidding back. "You're getting predictable," Sukuna sneered. Yuji's vision swam. He was running on fumes, but something burned inside him, not just rage, not just determination, but something deeper. The faces of those he'd failed, those he'd saved, flickered in his mind. Nanami's last words. Junpei's smile. He clenched his fists. Then, an echo. A resonance. The faintest pulse of another soul within him. Sukuna's grin faltered for the first time. What? Yuji's body moved before he could think. His cursed energy surged, not just his own, but something older, wilder. A technique he'd never wielded before erupted, black tendrils of energy lashed out, wrapping around Sukuna's limbs. The king of curses snarled, struggling against the binding, but for the first time in centuries, he was restrained. Megumi's eyes widened. That's... Yuji didn't hesitate. He channeled every ounce of strength into his fist, the air distorting around it. Sukuna's smirk returned, but there was something new in his gaze, doubt. You think this will work? He spat. I don't think, Yuji growled. I know. His fist connected. The impact sent a shockwave through Shibuya, the ground splitting beneath them. Sukuna's body crumpled, his form flickering between Yuji's features and his own monstrous visage. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then, silence. Sukuna's presence waned, his essence forced into dormancy. Yuji collapsed to his knees, gasping. The black tendrils dissipated, leaving only exhaustion in their wake. Around him, the battlefield lay in ruins, but the oppressive weight of Sukuna's aura was gone. Megumi staggered to his feet, his voice hoarse. Yuji. You did it. Yuji didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. The cost had been too high. He looked at his trembling hands, hands that had taken lives, hands that had saved them. The line between hero and monster had never felt thinner. Nobra stirred, groaning as she pushed herself up. Damn. That hurt, she muttered, then smirked weakly. But not as much as whatever you just did to that bastard. A choked laugh escaped Yuji. The relief was fleeting. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. The higher-ups would come for him. The scars of Shibuya would never fade. But for now, they were alive. As the dust settled, Yuji made a silent vow. He wouldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. No matter what came next, he'd keep fighting. Because that's what it meant to be a Jujutsu sorcerer.